I do want to bring in a friend of the show, Joshua Ritter, an LA criminal defense attorney and former LA County prosecutor, to talk more about this case as it does continue to develop. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So what are your thoughts on the fact that it did take a full week, and we do expect that a jury will be seated later today so that opening statements can begin on Monday? Did you expect that it would take a full week?
Yeah, actually, to be honest with you, I thought it might even take longer because with a case of this magnitude and the media attention that you had on it, also it's expected to last 10 weeks. There's a lot of people who just can't serve on a jury for that long. So you'd expect that you would lose a lot of potential jurors for hardship, for other kind of bias reasons. They've seen so much in the news. And so that whole process of just finding people who are even qualified to be part of that initial veneer, they call it, that would then go into the voir dire process with attorneys is expected to take a long time. So the fact that it's taken a week, I think, is actually them moving pretty quickly along.
So what kind of jurors, and you kind of touched on this, but what kind of jurors are they actually looking for?
So the judge wants people who just don't carry any kind of bias. People who come in, they may have heard about it on the news, but they don't have any kind of preconceived conceptions about what they expect as far as guilt or innocence of anybody involved. But if you're the defense, I think you want people who maybe, are inclined towards conspiracy theory, or people who perhaps have experience with domestic violence or mental health issues, because I think that's going to play a large role in Lori Vallow's case. I believe a large part of her defense is going to be pointed at somebody else, perhaps Chad Daybell, and how he may have influenced her to take part in this horrible, horrible crime. The prosecution, on the other hand, wants really common sense people. They want those kind of blue collar folks. I said when I was a prosecutor, I always wanted the guy with a little bit of a belly who just kind of sat back in his chair with his arms folded over his chest and didn't want to take any nonsense from anybody. And that's the kind of person you want. They're not going to care about, her religious beliefs, whatever kind of influence Chad may have had over her. They see 2 dead children and they're going to hold somebody responsible for that.
Is it possible to, concerns I'm sure exist about possibly tainting the jury? How exactly do they go about making sure that that is not going to be an issue? How do they go about picking that jury and making sure that there aren't going to be any issues down the line?
So that's what a lot of the questioning over this past week has been about, because there's so much media coverage, because you're talking about a smaller metropolitan area. I know we're not talking about a village, but we're talking about a smaller area where news like this really captures the local media pretty significantly. So they want to make sure that even though there's people who may have heard about it, that they're not kind of predisposed towards one side or the other. You'd be surprised, too. You think that a story like this, everybody would know about it. Everybody would be talking about it in the coffee shops, and there's no way they could find anyone who doesn't have any preconceived notions. But a lot of people, even in bigger cities, even with bigger stories, they don't care. They're interested in how their baseball team is doing, and they're interested in what's happening in entertainment. And so you will get a lot of people who just may know about it tangentially, but they don't have any preconceived notions and can come into this jury pool without a bias.
So where do we go from here? We know opening statements are expected to begin on Monday, assuming everything plays out the way that it's supposed to. But we're talking about a fairly lengthy trial of 10 weeks. Now, when they say that, is it possible that it goes shorter than that, longer than that, or do they stick to that 10-week period?
That's the target. My experience is these things tend to go longer because you just don't know what things are going to develop in court. That's kind of their best estimate for the prosecution, saying, I have so many witnesses. I expect these witnesses to last half a day, these other witnesses to last a full day or more, and they kind of do their best to come to an estimate. In my experience, it seems to always run over because you have issues that come up in the meantime. Perhaps evidentiary issues that you have to handle outside of the presence of the jury that could take a half a day or more to really suss out. So a lot of that, estimate comes from what is our best guess if we don't have any hiccups along the way. I wouldn't be surprised though if it went longer. If it went shorter, that would actually be surprising to me. But this is all a guess game when it comes to trial work.
And what do you think about the whole situation here with cameras not being allowed inside the courtroom? We know that it is going to be some audio that's released, but how does it change things when there aren't those media cameras that are inside the courtroom broadcasting everything as it's happening?
Yeah, that was a curious decision for me by the judge as to why they wouldn't want that transparency on a case of this kind of media importance and attention nationally, that people are really watching this and they want to know, how the judicial process takes place. You can understand to some extent why the judge wants to preserve the sanctity of the trial. He doesn't want jurors being influenced by too much media attention, but we live in a different world than we did 20 years ago, where having cameras in the courtroom might be a novelty. Now, people almost expect it. It's almost the exception when you don't have cameras. So it was a surprising move by the judge. We will have reporters, but it's not the same thing. I'm happy at least that we have audio so that we do have kind of an objective understanding of what was taking place inside the courtroom, but really nothing replaces having cameras and a live feed.
Why was it necessary to move the trial to a different area, not the area where she lived or where the crimes, happened? Why was it important to move that trial to a different location? And does that happen fairly often?
I think in this case, it had more to do with logistics and being able to handle a trial that they knew was going to have this kind of media attention, to have a courtroom where they knew they could handle something like that, judges who were experienced with it. I don't believe this was in regards to a change of venue. Oftentimes you see that when you have a crime with this kind of media attention taking place in a very rural or small community, that they would want to change of venue because it really does saturate that area too much to get an unbiased jury pool. But I think in this case, it really came down to a logistical issue more than anything.
All right. Joshua Ritter there, LA criminal defense attorney. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Anything else that you want to add about all of this before I let you go?
I think the one thing to pay attention to is, how is Lori Vallow's mental health going to play a role in this case? Beforehand, her lawyers have said that they're not going to make it an issue. Well, that was when the death penalty was still on the table, and they knew they could reserve those arguments for the penalty phase of the trial. We don't have that anymore. We only have this one segment of the trial. We're not going to go into a penalty phase. So I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow try to get her mental health issues in front of those jurors. Idaho doesn't have a traditional insanity defense, but they can still argue those things if it goes towards her mens rea in a premeditated first-degree murder case. So that'll be interesting to watch.
I mean, for sure. Thank you again for taking the time to join us, and I'm sure we'll have you back as this trial is going to go on for, as we said, possibly 10 weeks there.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.